recorded at Medicines from the Earth in June of 2014. For more information on our conferences, lecture notes, and recordings, visit our website, botanicalmedicine.org.
The adrenal network, which I'm going to describe as the kidney essence adrenal network, and we'll get a little more into that. And people who are have a little bit of background in Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine will have an easier time understanding that, what I mean. But for the rest of you, I'm going to try to break it down and give it to you in a way that makes sense. My approach is different, just in the sense that the way my mind works is more metaphorical and analogical, which is why I fell in love with Chinese medicine so much, because it's really a poetic medicine. It's really a medicine of metaphor. It's one of those things where you can easily understand what is being talked about. When you see the pitfalls is, when you see it, it makes sense. You see somebody says, oh yeah, look, here's the situation. You see all these, you see redness, you see elevated blood pressure, you see elevated heart rate, and someone says, yeah, that's heat. And you go, oh, cool, I got it. And then it makes sense. But then when you're on the other side of it and you're trying to diagnose someone, you're looking at the constellation of symptoms and come up with a diagnosis, it's a much different story. So I'm going to try to make it simple enough to see. So I put this first picture up. This is the classic fibromyalgic kind of presentation where there's pain all over the body. And, as a kinesiologist, I look into pain a lot. I look at people's musculoskeletal systems, and I often treat people who come in with shoulder pain, ankle pain, hip pain. And most of the time I ask, the first question I say, well, did you fall off your horse? Did you get hit by a car? And they say, no. And I say, well, what happened? I don't know. My shoulder just hurts. That's the classic, indication for me that this isn't really a musculoskeletal problem in the sense that it's coming from the musculoskeletal system. It's more that the musculoskeletal system is manifesting the problem. It's where the body is saying, hey, there is a problem, but it's coming from a deeper source. And I want to kind of touch on how that works and how I see the neurological web weaving from the organ systems, which is where we experience life, through our organs, the secreting glands that communicate and metabolize the life experience on our spiritual world here, in our spiritual life, in our emotional life, and in the chemical and physical life, and that's all being related through the neurological system back into the spine and being networked into the musculoskeletal system where we are experiencing our pain in this situation of fibromyalgia. So I talk first about balance and harmony. Talking about being able to adapt. It's like the idea here is that when the rocks on both sides of this teeter-totter are equal, it's very stable. But if we remove a rock, the thing's going to tip, and you're going to need to put some more weight on that other side. You're going to have to try to compensate every time you want to keep this thing in balance. It's the idea of like riding a bike or being on a surfboard, where once you get a little momentum, things go really smooth and easy. But when you're going slow, when things are sluggish and it's not going you don't have that momentum to keep things in a stable, balanced place, it's very easy for things to get out of balance, and easy for you to fall over, easy for things to wobble, lose your direction. And so that's kind of where this idea comes in, because life is about stress for us. Aging is stress. Being in the sun has its own type of stress. I used to talk about, last year my lectures were about the cost of doing business in an oxygen-rich environment. It's just stressful to be burning sugars, burning fuel in oxygen in our bodies. That it always creates some kind of an off gas, some kind of a toxin that's released that then we have to quench all the time. We're constantly having to, it's like we have little furnaces inside of our bodies that are burning, and we have to insulate those furnaces. You follow me? So we're constantly having to expend some of our essence to quench this heat that's coming from the fire that we're burning. So that's just part of being alive. We're like little stars. There's a trillion little stars in us, all burning, little galaxies. We've got to cool them down or they're going to burn out of control. And the burning out of control part's what I want to get into today, and how we really have to address that burning in a way that's thorough and looks at the deeper kind of levels of where our control mechanisms come from and how we maintain those. And so one way, of course, is just to stay in a place of balance and harmony. And so it's the old adage that, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And working in this world today where diseases like cancer are becoming, just incredibly epidemic, I can't tell you guys how much more effective we can be with somebody who has the pre-existing conditions or the tenets or the symptoms or the alarm signals that could lead them down the road of a named disease. We can do so much rather than once the disease process is fully manifested, and in the case of cancer, the lump or the bump or the growth is there, it's a much different story. Our options are so much more limited. So just to get back to that maintenance of balance and harmony, treating people before they're truly sick with the named disease. So I like to look at the root of the cause of a situation in every case. Mineral deficiencies, vitamin deficiencies. We know our soils are depleted. We know that there's toxins in our environment that use up our nutrient cofactors as we try to metabolize them. But you can identify that something's deficient. It can be a hormone deficiency. Someone can be testosterone deficient, or a menopausal woman could be estrogen deficient. We could look at these different deficiencies and say, oh, we can replenish that thing. But what I'm always looking for is, why is that deficient? Because I don't believe that every woman who goes through menopause has to suffer. I don't believe that it's a suffering type of an issue. We call it the climacteric period in Chinese medicine, which means there's a change taking place. And again, if you get back to balance and harmony, if you go through that change and you've got a lot of momentum on your bike, you can go right through it. It's like if you hit a mud puddle, like a big thing of mud. If you're going slow, you fall over in the mud. If you're going fast, you cruise right through it. So we want to try and help people stay balanced and get through the mud. So identifying why the imbalance exists in the body. And that's where I think we're going to find the most, effectiveness in treating this disease of adrenal fatigue. And it's so funny because when I'm looking up adrenal fatigue on the internet just to see, what are people talking about with adrenal fatigue, the first thing they say is, well, this isn't really we don't really believe this exists. People talk about it, but we don't really believe it. And it's just a word, it's just a concept, but it has a lot of meaning for me, and I think it's really helpful for people to understand it, because the adrenals are the source of transmutation of what we call essence in Chinese medicine into material. And material, I mean hormones, all the different hormones that we have. The directing chemical messengers that send information out to your body to rebuild tissues, to tell cells to replicate. It's the place where that transition happens. Because in Chinese medicine, the kidneys is where our essence is stored. And the idea is that you have so much essence in your life, and you can burn it up quick, or you can preserve it. And the old Taoists, the sages, would work very hard at finding a harmonious life in harmony with nature, with the natural cycles, to preserve their essence so they could live a long time and be free of diseases. And I'm going to get to the point where we talk about kind of what essence depletion looks like, and I've got a good analogy about bank accounts that I'm going to bring up a little later that's really important so we can understand kind of how this system works. But I'm calling it the KEA, the Kidney Essence Adrenal Network. And so this is a system that's developed in the first year and a half of life. So that first year and a half of life, as an infant, becoming a toddler, the child is dependent on daily rhythms, biorhythms. You want to wake up at the same time, sleep at the same time, eat at the same time. You want to poop at the same time. Everything wants to be in cycle, and you don't want to be moving around all the time. It wants to be stable. There's a lot of stability in that first year and a half of life that helps predict how that kidney adrenal system is going to work down the road. How stable is it? And once it's really stable, again, it's hard to throw it off balance. If it's unstable at the start, and this is why I try to look back in people's lives when I'm working with them, how was their first year and a half of life? A lot of us had, parents in the military moving around a lot, or divorces happened and children were split up. There was no rhythm, so the rhythm was thrown off. So the first thing I do with people before we've got into anything else is let's get the rhythms set up in your life. If we want to get the adrenal system back in order, the kidney adrenal essence system, let's start with getting you into a rhythmic pattern. And it's hard for people, especially like nurses, people who work the night shift, people who are shifting their world from one side of the night-day equation to the other, people who travel far and wide, who have big hours of time differences. It really becomes taxing on the adrenal system. So regulation of homeostasis. Again, we're back to this place of, I get back to the idea that we have the kidney element is water in Chinese medicine. It's got the flavor of the kidney is salt. So you've got this very oceanic, very womb-like type of concept with the kidneys. It's this source. Where did we come from? We came from the ocean. Where did life come from? Well, if we take the evolutionary story, it came out of the ocean. It came from our big womb, big mother womb, this big Gaia water womb. And so then where that place is in us, the deep place, the unknown place, the emotion is fear in that organ. So what does fear do to that organ? If you're afraid of the unknown, you're afraid of anything in your life, it drives you into what's called the stress response. You start to get, oh my God, I don't know, I'm afraid. And that's where we start to see attacks on this system. Remember, if you're stable, if you're calm, mom's got you in your arm, you're suckling on the nipple, everything is good, you feel calm, the kidneys are stable. There's no fear. There's nothing to worry about. But once you get fear involved in it, and it's fear of, am I going to be late for work? Oh my God, is that person going to pull out in front of me in their car? Oh my God, is that phone call? Is that guy that thinks that's pissed off at me because of that thing I did? Oh God, did I not take care of that detail? All those little things in your mind that run the fear cycle will begin to use your essence to drive this stress system. And where that essence is being transformed into the stress hormones, and here we're going to talk about cortisol, cortisone, we're going to talk about adrenaline and noradrenaline or epinephrine, norepinephrine, and we're going to see how those stress responses, that fearful, and it's not necessarily like you're just afraid of life, but just fear of what might happen, anticipation and expectation, and those things not being met, that drives the system of essence transmutation away from the rebuilding, anabolic, regenerative hormones into the stress response system, okay? So I'm going to talk about just this concept is represented here. On top of the kidneys, I look at the adrenal glands, and when I first saw this image years ago, I said, God, they're like control centers. They're controlling what's happening. How is the kidney essence being given to the body? So when we say adrenal fatigue, I look deeper into the kidneys. That's why I always want to combine the kidney essence adrenal system, not just look at adrenal fatigue, but looking at this relationship between the adrenals and the kidneys and how the adrenals sit right on top of them. It's like they have the perch, they're over them, they're looking at the oversight. Okay, what's the body needing right now? What's the demand? Okay, give me essence. Let's go, kidneys. Give it to me. And then I'm going to give it to the body because the body's asking me through the hypothalamus, through the pituitary. Right? They're going to be asking the adrenals to give certain things. And the adrenals are going to respond by taking it from your source, whatever you have. And so, utilization and output of essence, it's really important to understand how this works and where we're taxing ourselves and how we can eliminate that taxation, because that taxation leads to named diseases, and that's what we want to stay away from. How do we replenish the essence? Well, this gets back to the most simple concept of eating. Just taking in food, taking in air, prana, taking in life. However we do, we get to take that and then we get to transform it into what is the essence of it. Get that essence back down to the kidneys, and we can kind of buffer our losses. We can buffer our output to some degree. Okay, so that's one of the things we can do, and I'll talk more about how the digestive aspect of it becomes a big player. So in this stress response system, at the bottom of this is the kidney and the adrenals, and this is I call it the PHPTA axis. Donnie's been calling it the HPTA axis. He was including the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the thyroid, and the adrenal. And I just added the pineal gland here too, because when we're talking about rhythm and cycles, the pineal gland is so important. It's basically like the metronome. I think of it. I'm a musician as well. I'm a drummer, and it's one of my professions as well. And so I'm always thinking about time and rhythm and energy and what does the moment call for. Same thing with people. And so I like to include the pineal in there, because the pineal is basically mapping this metronome, this metronomic delivery of sleep, wake, eat, sleep, wake, eat. So the hypothalamus, of course, is this gland that's basically measuring out in the body what is present in the blood. Everything from pH and blood pressure to every compound, every hormone, everything that's out there, and it's relaying it back and saying, okay, do we need a little bit more of that, or do we have enough of that? And everything's in relation, and then it releases what are called releasing hormones to the pituitary. And the pituitary gets the releasing hormone and then sends out a stimulating hormone, which stimulates one of the glands, which I consider the musicians in this. Or if you had the composer as the hypothalamus, then you have the conductor as the pituitary, then you have the musicians as the glands, right? So the kidneys are one of the main musicians, and I think they're kind of the drummers, they're just down in the deep, keeping the rhythm, right? So we have really profound influences here on the glands. And I mean this, you guys understand, when I say the endocrine system, I mean the secreting glands. We're talking about the kidneys, and we're talking about the spleen, we're talking about the liver, the heart, we're talking about the lungs. These are the secreting glands. They all have an interface with each other, and then with the neurological system as well. And recall that a neurotransmitter is a hormone. They're the same thing. It's just that hormones happen in the bloodstream, in the body, between the glands, and neurotransmitters happen in the neurological system, so through the nerves. They're the same compounds, and some of them are the same compounds. It's just they're called different things when they're in the different system. So the overlap is called the neuroendocrine system. So we have a lot of interface. That's back to that idea of, oh, my shoulder hurts. Why? I don't know. Okay, well, let's find out what's going on deeper in your body to find out where that pain might be coming from, because it's really a signal. You didn't just damage your shoulder, cause a bunch of stagnant blood there, and then feel pain from it. That's not what happened. Okay. So I really love this image. When I found this image online, I was like, that is so perfect. I love it. So chronic stress is really the thing we're talking about here. What is chronic stress? It's that constant sense that, oh my God, there's this impending sense that something's not right. There's the fear. What is it that's going wrong in my life? There's always a stress, and the stresses is just, they're everywhere. It's everything we're doing. Gravity is a stress, and we're not going to get away from that. We're not going to get away from the sun. We're not going to get away from toxins in our foods. We're not going to get away from the fact that we're digesting and metabolizing sugar in the presence of oxygen and creating hydrogen peroxide radicals. We're not going to that's just how it is. So if we continue to drive that kidney adrenal essence system through the stress response, through this, oh my God, is this okay? Am I going to be okay? That's continually changing what those adrenals are putting out, what they're telling the kidney to make, what the essence is becoming. So the difference between adaptation and maladaptation, adaptation is, okay, it's a stress, cool, I'm just going to deal with it, no problem. Just like water off my back or let it flow through me, I'm just going to work it out. Your heart rate doesn't go up, your mental processes don't speed up, there's no threat to focus on, you're chilling. Maladaptation is, oh my God, am I going to, okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. That pattern running over and again is going to be what causes the breakdown here. And I love how this cheetah is running at this full speed, this sprint. And if you saw the cheetah and it's just walking, you see cats, they're just pure relaxation, right? Every muscle is just limp. I'm always blown away by how cats do that. And then in an instant, they can be on full firing, all nerves, everything in there. Cheetah's projecting at 80 miles an hour. Amazing. But if you start pushing you see how the cheetah's body shifts to this running position. It's like a different structure. If you look at a greyhound, like the dog as it's standing there is one thing, and then the dog sprinting is another thing. Well, if you start sprinting all the time and you start to get into that shape, you can't keep that up very long. Those animals sprint for a short burst and they're done. So if we start getting into sprinting every day, all day, mentally, with our heart rate, with our mind processes, we're focusing on a threat all the time, we're pushing ourselves like this. And what starts to happen is our spots fall off. Right? So on top of chronic stress, you have acute stress. Now this is the thing, and for me, I'm kind of an acrobat in life. I love to do lots of things. I'm a very dynamic person. I like music. I've got my clinic. I've got businesses. I've got lots of friends and family. I've got many passions. I like to sail. I like to travel. And so I often get a lot of things happening at once. And the metaphor is I'm juggling. I've got a bunch of balls, or people talk about spinning plates. And so I'm like, this is great. I'm cruising along. So there's this chronic stress of me kind of always having to keep multiple balls going. And if I can keep myself calm in it and just say, okay, that's okay. It's all going to be okay. Oh, that ball didn't get handled. I need to deal with it. Okay, well, I'm going to change something and make something else happen. We have to put down some balls for a little while and focus in on this. But what happens with acute stress is I've gotten to the point where I've got 8 balls going, and now I'm like, I'm going to walk a tightrope. Why not? Let's walk. Let's do some tightrope walking. Woo! And I'm like, I got this. This is awesome. And then all of a sudden, the breeze comes up. And what do? Oh my God, I drop the balls and grab the thing and hold on for dear life. What kind of things are like that? Well, divorce is like that. A big one. Relationship separations. Everything's, you're already running, you're already stressed, your job, your kids are in trouble, you've got any number of layers of financial stress, you've got your parents, you're in a fight with your parents, you're not working it out. Layers and layers of stress are happening, and you're constantly driving that stress response system to, kind of max, and your spots are already falling off. Then something happens, a big thing. And this thing could be like your dog runs into your leg, and you sprain your knee. And suddenly, well, what happens then? Well, Now your body went into a traumatic response that you don't have the adaptability, the adaptive reserve, the capacity to just go, that's cool, we're going to work through that. Instead, it's like, oh my God, the body goes into a flare-up. The fires rage out of control. Things start to change, and they're uncontrolled. This is where we get to a very interesting part of what the kidney adrenal essence system does. It cools down the system. It calms the system. It's that oceanic, salty water that puts out, like what's happening in Fukushima. Dump more salt water in there. Let's cool it down. Keep it cool. That's what's happening for us. That system cools down the fire of trauma. But if you don't have the reserve to cool down the trauma and the fire that rages out of control from it, oh man, the fire starts raging out of control all over your body. And the weird thing is it manifests differently for everybody. It's not one thing. It doesn't just show up as one thing. And there's really no answer to these questions about fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. There's no answer to cancer. There's no answer to any of these things. There is only being present with each patient, with each moment. It's a person in a point in time. And that's the place where you want to be. If you can be present in that place, find the materials, find the solutions for that person in that moment, you can come up with a solution that works. But there's no system, there's no dogma, there's no idea, there's no concept. There are only tools, and then there's individuals. And although your treatment might be very different than my treatment for this patient over here, maybe Larry W., we're going to treat him maybe from different places. We could both have a solution that works. There's no one right way. But if we understand some of these things, so epinephrine, that's the big one. So once you hit that point where, your dog runs out in the street, you rush to grab it, you don't make it. The dog's hit by the car, the dog's, the amount of energy that comes out of you, that chill, that tingle through your entire body, you're just pushing essence out of your body in an incredible rate to manifest incredible strength. The stories. The mom lifts up the car. Well, where does that come from? It doesn't just come from some free energy place. No, you used that energy. That was you almost shortened your life. You ever see where someone goes through a really traumatic birth or a traumatic experience and suddenly they get a white streak through their hair? Well, in Chinese medicine, your essence becomes blood, and hair is the extension of your blood. So suddenly your blood just was so deficient because you used so much of your essence to manifest that superhuman event that you actually then caused this deficiency that manifested in your body somewhere. And it could be pain. That's what we're going to end up talking about. But here's just how epinephrine actually pushes your body away. So the stress hormones push your body away from that rest and digest, that rebuilding place, and they push it into a place where you're basically focusing on a threat. Okay? So here's a little example. Two of the main avenues that adrenals are going to turn essence into material, you have aldosterone, which is your primary mineralocorticoid, interweaving with the lungs and the kidney renin system as far as how you're going to hold water and salts through the tubules in the kidneys. Are you going to hold more salts or let more salts go? Thereby you're going to have more water in your body or less. Then the adrenaline and norepinephrine, that's a big part of it. Those are the tyrosine-based hormones, the same tyrosine that's the basis of thyroid hormones. Those two hormones, they basically run you into the place where you're going to do something superhuman. You're going to run away from the bear, you're going to climb the tree, you're going to dive out of the way of the car, or you're just going to be in a fight with your partner and get so excited and just upset that you're going to be pushing it. So you're going to be putting out all this adrenal essence. Now the middle pathway, cholesterol, amazing. All this talk about cholesterol, right? Cholesterol is this bad thing. Are you kidding me? Cholesterol is the basis for how we regenerate ourselves. Our brain is mostly cholesterol. We need cholesterol. We're going to find out that the cardiovascular problem is not cholesterol, guys. I just saw a study, 40% of heart attacks can be reduced just by brushing your teeth twice a day. So we're talking about inflammation, we're talking about infections, we're talking about oxidative damage. Controlling those things. That's how we help our heart, our cardiovascular system, not through controlling cholesterol. The people who live in indigenous tribes, like the Native Americans, their diet was not high in sugar, it was not high in carbohydrates at all, it was not high in protein, it had some protein, but it was highest in fat. And they prized the older animals that had more fat on their bodies. They loved the fat. And look at how, if you see the older pictures of Native Americans, they were just beautiful, even in older ages. And a lot of the stories from Weston Price and people, they would eat tons of fat because the fat became this source for them to make what it is that gives us vitality. So pregnenolone, being the main precursor hormone, it gives us progesterone, which then becomes a precursor for cortisol. And this is a simplification. There's a lot of pathways, okay? But if you start turning this thing this way and you start going down towards cortisol, progesterone is stolen to make cortisol. So now this pregnenolone can't go over here and make DHEA, testosterone, and estrogen. all the things that rebuild our tissues, it goes the other way. So each time you're running that stress response, that, oh my God, is it going to be okay? You're pushing yourself into a depletion of rebuilding your bones, rebuilding your nerves in your brain, rebuilding your cardiovascular system, your network, rebuilding your tissues isn't happening because you're pushing your energy towards your brain, towards making more glycogen in your liver, towards focusing your mental energy on whatever the threat is. You don't want to be focusing on the threat all the time. Imagine the hunter-gatherer peoples. Well, when they're not hunting and running through the fields to fight an animal, most of the time they're hanging out. They're not like, oh my God, all the time. It's my idea that human beings have lived on this planet for a long time, and what made it work for them or didn't make it work for them, I think a lot of it had to do with how calm they could be in their life. How calm can we maintain? So cortisol, the primary glucocorticoid, corticoid, right, comes from the cortex. So corto means adrenal cortex. So we're talking about hormones that are made in the adrenal cortex. So that's interesting. So cortisol is very profound. It's very influential on our entire endocrine system. You wake up in the morning and your body makes cortisol. It's like you're going to rise to a challenge. If you're under a stressful situation, you need cortisol. What does it do? It drives you to have more blood sugar. It suppresses the immune system in acute situations. It helps to build it in certain ways in chronic situations. Cortisol has a huge impact on the functioning of your body, increasing your heart rate, increasing your blood pressure, getting you ready for whatever it is that you're going to do. That's why 8 a.m. you wake up and your cortisol levels should be high. They should be peaking. And then as you go to the middle of the day, they fall to about a midpoint, they plateau, and then by the time you're going to sleep at night, your cortisol should drop off. Fibromyalgic and chronic fatigue patients often suffer from insomnia as well. So you're going to see that a lot of them do have a cortisol pattern or an adrenal essence rhythm that's skewed. And oftentimes it goes the other way. You probably have all seen this. Or it just flatlines. It's just low. It's just hard. Hypofunctioning is a big part of this. So the one thing that's really important about this whole network is feedback loops. Okay? What I mean by feedback loops is when something is secreted from an organ or a gland and it affects a target tissue, the hypothalamus measures how much of it is present in the body, and then it sends a message, stop releasing that or release more of that, depending on how much is present. It's very important in the adrenal relationship to the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the thyroid. Okay? That's the central organizing network of our body. It's the central neuroendocrine organizing network. We can focus on that a lot. And adaptogenic herbs, that's what they do. They work with that central, because those are the players that keep everything in balance. They regulate things. If someone has a frank problem with their kidney, treat their kidney. But if it's for these kind of chronic conditions, I always look to that central organizing system. And I call it that PHPTA system. Look at all those secreting glands that are the central organizers. Feedback, really important with cortisol. So what does cortisol do? Increasing amino acids, muscles need amino acids in the moment. You're going to do stuff. You got to go. You got to have protein. Glycogen. So you're going to make stored glucose. You want to keep storing glucose in the liver in case you got problems coming up. You're going to need energy. Fatty acid availability for energy production. And you guys, fatty acids is the place for human beings to make energy. The pyruvate cycle, okay, which is the precursor for running the Krebs cycle, right? The ATP generating cycle. That's like the elegance of human respiration. It's so beautiful. Remember my AP exam in biology. I walked in and they just gave me a booklet and said, describe in detail and diagram the Krebs cycle. I was like, I walked out. I was an international baccalaureate student. I did great on their test, but I didn't study that thing at that time in my life. But it was just, and then now that I've gotten deeper into it, I looked at it and I was like, wow, this is a very elegant and beautiful system that human beings and animals have developed to make energy. And it's efficient. It has a minimal amount of pollutants as toxins coming off of it, and it's very high amount of output of ATP, energy, which I call the currency of qi from China, qi of Chinese medicine. ATP is basically the currency of qi. So you use ATP to drive energetic systems, okay? Now, let's just jump back into this thing here about fatty acids, because you can take a fatty acid, cut it into bits, and run it right into pyruvate. It becomes pyruvate. You can chop it into pyruvate molecules. Those go right in and feed that Krebs cycle. Of course, you got to have all the little cofactors along the way. Like we're going to talk about malic acid, in fibromyalgia especially, and how malic acid's part of that. Aspartic acid's part of that. There's all these different parts of the cycle that help the cycle move in its cyclical pattern so that you can keep generating ATP. Okay? So, sugar is the stress fuel. When you're under stressful situations, you burn sugar. Cancer burns sugar exclusively. It does not burn fatty acids. It can burn sugar in oxygen or not in oxygen. We thought for a while that it was all anaerobic, but it's not. Cancer can aerobically metabolize glucose as well. But it's interesting is that when we're stressed out and we're dumping sugar into our bloodstreams and we're running this what's called the lactic acid cycle, where we're taking sugar to make pyruvate, we make lactic acid as a byproduct. It's the burning sensation in your muscles when you work out too hard. You've used up all the sugar that you could and all the fatty acids that were available. Then you start fermenting sugar to make pyruvate. It's that fermentation that brings lactic acid into your muscles that you have to get rid of because it shuts down the system. You can't only do it for so long until there's too much lactic acid and there's nothing else you can do. You're overwhelmed by the toxic output of the use of sugar. Okay? You guys follow me on that? So remember, cancer only uses that first cycle. It's the glycolysis cycle. That's all it uses. We don't want to do that. We want to use fatty acids, chop them into good little bits, run them into the Krebs cycle with no toxic overload. Nothing. Just pure energy in. So I'm getting back to fats. I talked about the Native Americans and fats and native cultures and fats. So remember us. And saturated fats are awesome. Okay? I'm not kidding. So cortisol counteracts inflammation and allergies. How interesting. We're going to see that when people get really deficient, when their kidney essence adrenal system is really weak, man, sensitivities start coming up. I mean, I've had patients that all they could eat was turkey and rice. That's it. Anything else, and they got hives, or they got pain, or they got rashes, or whatever. So this whole process of how we're going to treat fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and the host of other things is we're going to build them from the root, that core. We're going to build their essence, and we're going to get their cortisol levels back up to a place where they can quench the fires. They can put out the burning that's happening, which is smoky and stinky and makes all kinds of issues come up on the surface of the body, okay? Cortisol also spares sodium. We'll see a good relationship with that in licorice. Licorice actually spares sodium as well because it spares cortisol. Stress resistance, so keeping your cortisol levels at a good balanced level, you're able to adapt. You need cortisol to adapt. And we'll find that one of the things that happens with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue is there's not enough cortisol. You can have too much cortisol, like as in Cushing's disease, where you have like too much and things get really crazy, but that's a different disorder altogether. Addison's disease is the opposite. That's the one where the adrenals are just totally deficient. There's no more production and things. That's another world too, where you're going to need hormone support. But for most people, once you get a little deficient, once the essence system is weakened, the kidney adrenals are weakened, cortisol levels are low, that's where things start to go haywire because you can't put out the fires. Every time a fire starts, it just starts to go out of control. So that's where we go, well, you've got a quick allergy or somebody has a really hypersensitivity reaction to something, what do we give them? What's the first line of defense at the medical doctor's office? Steroids, right? Give them steroids. Well, this is our steroids. This is it. Hydrocortisone is cortisol. So I like this game, Pachinko. When I was a kid, I used to love my mom and dad's friend had one. It's a Chinese game, and you put the balls in, the little metal balls. Like you push you do the little lever, and then the ball shoots up, and then it goes ding, 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 and it comes down, and little lights go, and you never know quite where the ball is going to end up at the end. So that's my idea of kind of like, hey, let's give them DHEA, let's give them pregnenolone, let's give them estrogen, let's give someone testosterone. Well, where does it go? I don't know. Each person is uniquely different. The amount of metabolic pathway difference between one person and another is phenomenal. And it's back to epigenetics, which is the buzzword today, right? Not the genes that make up the human biome, the human genome, but how the genes function. Are they on? Are they off? Is the protein mutated? Is the protein normal? Is the protein being expressed in huge amounts? Is it being expressed in small amounts? And how does our diet, our lifestyle, our thoughts affect how those genes function? That's what's happening. And those genes code for proteins. They're all like little copy machines that make proteins. And what are enzymes made of? They're made of proteins. What do enzymes do? They allow us to metabolize any kind of compound that we take into our body. It can be a toxin, it can be a nutrient, it can be something, a food source. It can be an emotional life experience that's manifested by chemical messaging in our body. We got to metabolize it. And if we don't have what it takes to metabolize testosterone into testosterone as we want it to show up in our bodies, it'll become dihydrotestosterone, and it might become androstenediol beta, and it might become androstenediol alpha. We don't even see these hormones on any of these steroidogenesis pathways, but you give someone estrogen, well, what if it hydroxylates at the 2 position? Well, that's good. If it's at the 16 alpha position, that's bad. How do we know? Little metabolic pathways that are different for every single person. So when you start giving someone big doses of estrogen to treat their menopause, what if that person has a metabolic defect, that they don't metabolize estrogen in a way that allows them to excrete that estrogen? No, it actually gets converted into a form that is more proliferative and increases their chance of getting cancer. I can tell you, working with Donnie for 6 years, and now my last 3 years of my own practice, most of my breast cancer patients have been on hormones. Many of them have. That's a pretty heavy-duty thing. And all the data, all the clinical trial data, that's great, whatever. I don't base my life on clinical trial data because there's always, they call it, the observational factor. You look at the thing and you change it to become something that you want it to become, even if you try to remove yourself. It's the idea that there is no objectivity. There's no objective reality. It's impossible. We can't objectify it. So the best example I can show you of why clinical trials don't work or why we don't always need them is the old British Journal of Medicine article that came out about parachutes. I don't know if you guys saw it, but basically it was these guys, these really witty British guys came out and they made a presentation, a beautiful case study that was studying the effects of the parachute on mortality and morbidity when jumping out of an airplane. And they said, well, hey, if we want to randomize the study because we want to make it a randomized clinical trial that's controlled and has a placebo. So if you're one of the people that believes that the clinical trial, the randomized placebo-controlled double-blind clinical trial, is the gold standard and the only thing that we can base our decisions on, we'd like you to apply for the trial, and you'll be randomized to either parachute or not parachute. And I mean, it was such a beautifully laid out study. And what it basically said was, guys, parachutes work, okay? I don't need a study to tell me that the parachute works, okay? So I just keep that in mind when I'm looking at all this stuff. So hypoactivation, that's kind of what I was hitting on. So when the system isn't activated, and we're back to this feedback network. So one of the things that's so interesting about the feedback control between the adrenals and the hypothalamus and the pituitary is that when cortisol is released into the system by the adrenals, the hypothalamus goes, oh wow, there's lots of cortisol. I'm not going to send corticotropic releasing hormone anymore. And the pituitary says, I'm not sending adrenal corticotropic hormone anymore. So the system stops, everything cools down. Now, if your adrenals are tired, if your essence is burnt out, if you've been running the stress pattern over and over again, and now your cortisol levels are low, the hypothalamus is going, come on, let's get going, adrenal, and so you keep dumping these releasing and stimulating hormones into the body. Those things are driving these adrenals are like, I just don't have it, and every little bit of essence you have is being dumped out. So you never get a chance to sit back and recover. So that's one of the things I want to talk about is how do we get the system into recovery when you're constantly at this hypoactivation state. It's really important. It's not that you have too much cortisol and you're in the stress hormone and there's so much of it. It's that you've actually driven it for so long and it was high for a long time, you burnt out the stores to make it. You can't even afford to make it anymore. Okay? So just kind of how CFS and FM relate with hypothyroid. I'm going to talk about the thyroid on Sunday, and I want you guys to check that lecture out. I've got 6 Graves patients right now, all doing amazing. I've got one of them that I couldn't help, but it's a long story why, but we got a great treatment plan for Graves' disease. Hashimoto's, see it all the time, right? And it's not so hard to get people out of the autoimmune part of it if you know what you're doing and you can kind of take it in stride and the people can be good patients. But there is kind of like the thyroid-adrenal connection and that weakness. It takes a long time sometimes, especially when people are on thyroid hormone and they want to get off of it. It's a long process, and I want to describe how that all works and how we can do that effectively with people. So one of the things that Dr. Derry said, and he was a British Columbian doctor who was really big into the iodine movement and using thyroid glandulars. He was very into glandulars, and he spoke out very I'd say earnestly about the fact that, hey guys, we should be using the gland, which has all the components of the thyroid, at good doses, and we should be treating people based on their symptoms. And the reason you guys are pushing Synthroid is because you can patent it, and you're trying to make a bunch of money on it. Well, he eventually got his license revoked in 2002, and they came down on him pretty hard because they built a case around a patient that died, trying to say that he was involved in it and all this. But anyway, he was a big spokesperson for how we can treat this thing without using synthetics and with using the right dosages based on symptoms, not just on the TSH. Don't just treat prostate cancer on the PSA. You know what I mean? We're treating people here, not numbers. So he was a big part of that. And I think that it's important for all of us to be very diplomatic as we move forward to change medicine. We need to change the tide, but don't get bowled over by the wheel, because you can get rolled over real quick because the wheel's big and it's powerful. That's why good to have an organization like this. We can all feel linked together and do something, make some change. But one of the things that Dr. Derry said was that you've got to detect this thing early, and you've got to treat it early and up front to get a good result. Otherwise, it's going to take some time. And to tell you the truth, guys, most people come to me, it takes time. It just does. I feel like I'm pretty good at what I do, but it takes a lot of time. And so I just have to be really clear with people, let's just hang in there. And a lot of times with healing, it's a little bit of a roller coaster. You just want to make sure that it's all still going in the right direction. But there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. People want just a rocket ship straight to feeling better. And it just doesn't really work like that, especially with these chronic things. So fibromyalgia, I think many of you have encountered fibromyalgia, whether personally or in your practice or in your family. And so I always kind of let people know, hey, this is not really a diagnosis. It really isn't. It's just fiber muscle pain. That's what it means. And people call it fibro. And now there's a lot of kind of people glomming onto their disease. And a lot of people I've got my fibromyalgia. I've got my FM. And so breaking the cycle of that, thinking I have this disease. I mean, obviously people have always wanted to find the name of their demon so they could fight it and kill it. Back in Chinese medicine, once they found a ghost, or it was an ancestor, or then it was a pathological factor, whatever it is, you want to find something to point at and then go after that. But I'm just saying that underneath what is fibromyalgia is something else, and it's not just this diagnosis that you're destined to have it for the rest of your life. It's incurable. You're going to suffer. So break the cycle of suffering. And one of the things that comes up with fibromyalgia is this, that original picture of all the different points of pain, chronic multi-regional pain, and then allodynia, right? Allodynia is this, it's not that things that are normally painful are more painful, it's that things that normally aren't painful are painful. So what's going on with that? Somebody just touches you lightly and it's like, oh my God, it's just so intense. So you get a massage and it just sets everything off. Really, you've got to be really delicate with FM patients, because they'll react strongly in some cases to really light therapies that normally wouldn't have any problems for people. They would feel good for people. So you always got to look at these causative factors, comorbidities, other things that are happening at the same time. We talked about stress, acute stressors, chronic stressors. We got all those things. People have lost adaptability. And then I want to get into with fibromyalgia, biomedical solutions. What is there out there in the biomedical realm? And really, there isn't too much. What's interesting is that steroids don't work. They tried a bunch of trials with steroids, and they just don't work. They tried prednisone. And prednisone's a souped-up version of hydrocortisone. Dexamethazone's another souped-up version. So we have stronger and stronger steroids. But one of the things that's interesting about steroids is that they shut down the response, that feedback network. So as long as you're taking steroids, your adrenals are completely quiet. They just, boom, they're gone. Because the hypothalamus says, whoa, there's way too much steroid in the body. I'm not going to send a message to release anything else. And I don't want to do that with people, especially not for any long term. That's why steroids are short term only. And that's why when I'm going to talk about using adrenal gland as a glandular, it's short term only. That's the way that I use it. So differential diagnosis. I guess I could talk a little bit more about biomedical. So there's been a little bit of help with NSAIDs, anti-inflammatories, like people using Aleve and stuff. Some of that. Interestingly enough is that the 5-HT3 inhibitors, which are serotonin agonists, they've helped a lot. And then also some of the SSRIs, which are kind of juxtapositional to that, like mood-enhancing agents, antidepressants, tricyclic antidepressants. They have a really powerful effect on people's mood, which then has a powerful effect on how they're experiencing pain. So it's pretty interesting. It's not like an inflammatory process that's just out of control. It's not this autoimmune type of a thing where the body's attacking itself. It's really a change that occurs at what are being talked about as the mechanoreceptors or the nociceptors. So nociception is the sense of pain. And so the pain reception is skewed. It's like over-amplified. So for some people, suddenly a little pattern gets started where the pain signal just kind of goes zoom, and it's high. It's hot. Well, what's going on with that? We're not sure, but it's in the neurological system somewhere, and it's not being treated by anti-inflammatories very well. So it's not an inflammatory condition. It's something deeper than that, which is where I want to get down to nourishing the core essence of people. Let the body do a little bit of the work, but give the body what it needs to do that work. Because what we're trying on these sort of, basic antidepressant and anti-inflammatory levels aren't working very well. But that's not to say that mood enhancement helps. So things like St. John's wort, that's a good herb in a lot of patients with fibromyalgia. I like it in a formula. It helps. pattern differentiation, that was kind of the way that the Chinese medicine sees it. So for each person, there are certain things I like to do in general for these conditions, but then also you want to diagnose the patient. And that's with your thorough questioning, getting to know the patient deeply, understanding their condition, and then being able to apply materials that address their constitution directly. Symptoms, I mean, we're all pretty familiar with these symptoms, right? Fatigue and insomnia, big ones, the pain, depression and anxiety. I often see the image, and this happens in women so much more than men, like 50 times more. It's really interesting how that is, this disease, the natural history. Stiff joints, difficulty swallowing, frequent urination, waking at night to pee. It's neurological changes, and often it's neurogenic bladder is one of the things that happens. Also, like interstitial cystitis can occur in combination, where there's this irritation in tissues that get almost like the tissues are more dry, they're more irritated and friable. They just they're not moistened. Like you want to take an oil can to some of these people and just kind of squirt it all their joints. It's okay. Like Tin Man. The fibro fog, right? Brain fog. That's a big one that occurs. People really lose their memory. They're not able to think straight. That's back to the fact that the brain and the neurological system is generated by the kidney network. That's back to Chinese medicine. The kidney generates the bone marrow, the nerves, and the brain. The brain is considered a sea of marrow. It's the interchange. It's like the networking station. It's not this amazing place where all of our consciousness is. It's not how Chinese medicine sees it. It sees it as our consciousness is in the different organs, and then we network the communication through this neurological system. Multitasking becomes very hard. It becomes hard to do that juggling act, right? You just can't. You don't have it. It's like there's always a wind blowing. All you can do to hang on to the tight wire. So chronic fatigue syndrome, another one that's very similar, persistent profound fatigue. That's the main symptom. And the diagnosis is, you need to have 6 months of this persistent profound fatigue, kind of unknown origin for adults, and then 3 months in children to get the diagnosis. One thing that's interesting about it is that it has this aspect that you don't, when you exert yourself, it doesn't get worse. You're just always tired. You always feel terrible. You never want to exert yourself. It's not relieved by rest. People remember mononucleosis, right? We're going to talk about that Epstein-Barr virus and how that manifests in people. People just lay in bed for a month. It doesn't get better. What is that? What's that all about? And then also that CFS, there's no other causes present. You don't have anything that's standing out, any other kind of disease that's named, aside from maybe a viral infection. So some of the symptoms, also you've got these same kind of things. You wake up in the morning, and I always ask my patients, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? You feel groggy. You just feel like, oh my God, I can't get up out of bed. Sometimes it's just that people lay in bed, and they don't never feel rested. Never wake rested. That's a classic symptom for me of this kind of adrenal fatigue situation. And when I talk tomorrow about autoimmune diseases, we're going to see how autoimmunity is triggered by this pattern of having that essence be weakened, inability to put out fires, no oil to work with the joints, nothing to cool down the system, and so things rage out of control. A sore throat, swollen lymph nodes. And this is where CFS starts to get a little different, where you can differentiate between fibromyalgia. The fibromyalgic patients don't have those sort of infectious type of symptoms, whereas chronic fatigue almost always does. Lymph nodes somewhere that are swollen, and the sore throat. There's oftentimes a viral component underlying this. And remember, viruses are a yin type of infection. They're not going to manifest with high fevers, redness, elevated heart rate. They're more insidious. They're deeper. You have this low-grade fever, fatigue. Maybe you have phlegm, maybe you've got irritation in different places, you feel sick, you've got nausea, those kind of things. But viruses are different. So this is more of a viral type of infection if it's involved in CFS. And when your body's weakened, infections show up, not because you got exposed to it. I don't believe in this whole exposure thing. I think we're all exposed to all these pathogens all the time. They're in this room. There's staph and strep all over this table. I'm not going to go home and get a staph infection. But if I was really weak, it goes back to like the boy in the bubble, that whole concept. My God, this person is so depleted. They're just, and whether it comes from we call it the congenital source from the parents, whatever they got, their essence that they got in the beginning was so weakened, they don't have any ability to fight any infection or downregulate any inflammatory response. They could die just touching this table. You know what I mean? So I want to just, make sure you guys understand that in my idea of how this whole system works, we are all filled with all the biome, all the living organisms that are around us in this world, and it's our system's inherent control or actually like our interface with the world where we work with these viruses, we work with these bacteria, we work with these mycorrhizal fungi and these fungi that are growing in our bodies, these yeasts and things. Where does a yeast show up on your body? Something you got, I got a yeast infection. I've got some kind of a yeast rash between my toes. I got exposed to something. No, you didn't. The conditions changed. The conditions change. What grows there changes. There's competition between plants in your garden. You don't water this area, you water this area. What happens? Different life grows there. You give this area one soil amendment, and that one a different one. They grow different things. It's the same thing in our bodies. So just be careful. Our germ theory is good because we can look at it. We can actually look at the different germs, and sometimes we need to kill those germs in one case if someone's really weak and the disease has more energy than they do. But most of the time, I get people well by getting them strong enough to overcome the disease, push it back into its normal niche, which is probably something that never manifests as any problems, but it still has a place in our living network. All these things do. So here I've got some of the viruses that are associated with CFS. Post-viral fatigue syndrome is one of the things that is often associated, and one of the names people get is you have this virus that kind of got out of control. And not to say that you guys, sometimes people get exposed to viruses and they're just really virulent. They're really aggressive. People getting exposed to AIDS, for example. People getting exposed to large doses of mono in a place where, they're a little weakened. And that thing shows up. You could get exposed to a huge amount of bacteria. Your son, kids are a great example of how exposure through communicable diseases happens, because in Chinese medicine, kids are all yang. That's the idea. Yang meaning they're very outward and upward and loud and expressive. So they're sneezing and they're coughing and they're pushing and all this stuff is going out everywhere. And the parents are getting sick, right? And then the parents, they get sick. And the kid goes back to school and the parent gets the kid sick again, and kids over here get sick. And you watch it kind of travel through the community like that. And it definitely does. And some parents, when they're really strong, they don't get sick as much. And you'll see like a really depleted, weakened parent will often get sick very often from their kids. So there is that aspect of overexposure. A big exposure is harder to deal with than a small one. But if you have a strong network of interdependently working microorganisms, they're going to keep things in check. Not all CFS is created equal. That was my quote for the day. In some cases, we do need to treat the infection, right? Sometimes people need an antiviral. I've seen that happen. We've got to tamp this infection down first because you just can't get a handle on it. So Adrenal Rescue, that's kind of what I'm talking about today. Adrenal Rescue, short-term goals, management of acute symptoms, break the cycle, recover the KEA reserve, eliminate the insults, replenish the deficiencies, and clear pathological factors. Short-term is a little different for me than long-term, but they're both important and they kind of feed right into each other. Eliminating the insults, that's my number one thing for people. And that's why people either love me as a practitioner or they walk out and they never come back. Because I'm not the guy who's going to be like, sure, come on in, I'll treat you with acupuncture, I'll give you a treatment, you feel better, in a few days you feel the way you did before, you come back in, we'll do it twice a week, and you'll kind of just keep going like that. I'm like, no, I want you to get well, and I don't want to see you anymore. Really, I'm like, get out of my office. If you're here every day, no, that just happens. If you do good work, you're like a little fire burning. It's like people go, there's a fire, let's go over there. But it just sort of happens. If you do good work, more shows up. That's the funny thing, is that the more people you get well, it's not like you're done with your work. More work just comes. In China, the best doctors have no patients. Because they were in a village, right? And the villagers were all well. They were all healthy. Occasionally a patient comes in, Here it's like, we've got 8,000 patients. Yes, success. Well, that's just because our world is really sick. Times change. So the insults are on many different levels, of course. And I have 13 foods that I pull every patient off because I don't want to go through the process of muscle testing every food. I sometimes do for people because they want it. I don't really want to go through the allergy testing process with a lot of people because the allergy testing changes day to day. It changes over time. Wherever your reserve is, you could be very sensitive to tons of things, or you might not be sensitive to anything, depending on where you are in your life at that moment. So my 13 foods are sugar, and I think I have these written down somewhere. I hope so. You didn't see them? Bad presenter. Okay, I'll go really slow. You ready? Sugar, wheat, dairy, corn, soy, nuts, seeds, chips, popcorn, cocoa, caffeine, alcohol, nicotine. You guys get them? Okay. Now we'll go slow. Sugar, wheat, and that really means gluten for people, and you got to be careful when people get sensitive. Dairy, corn and soy. So right there you have the 5 main things that are the big ones. And the reason those ones are there is because we've genetically modified all those foods. Even though they're not GMO, guys, 100 years ago, we've genetically selected over and over again for wheat. The wheat that has the biggest barrier, the wheat that's resistant to the pests, the wheat that is easy to ship and stores the best. But that's not the one that's best for us. We react to it, And when you're deficient, you react to it more because the protein looks similar to parts of our tissue, especially the thyroid gland tissue, which we're going to talk about. Gliadin looks a lot like our TPO, looks a lot like it. So it starts to get really screwy in that when things go crazy. When you get a lot of fire burning and it gets smoky inside your system, your immune system is like, whoa, what's going on here? You can tag yourself. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. But so the wheat, dairy, corn, and soy, then it's chips. They're really hard on the digestion. And I'm back to the digestion. You've got to have the biome, the digestive process chips. I mean like potato chips, corn chips, rice chips, just chips in general, and puffy foods. Even like the rice cakes and all these things like that. It's really, some of the things are like really fluffy and they look like food and they feel like food, but they get in there, they're not food. Your body uses a lot of energy to digest something that's nothing, and then you have to recycle all the things you didn't use. And then with the chips, it's a lot of times it's trans fats, it's rancid fats, it's not good food, and it irritates what's called the ileocecal valve. It's one of the places I look, and I'm always looking at like the big things, the big stuff. What can I see pattern-wise in people? Big stuff first. And one of them is ileocecal valve syndrome. And it's kind of one of those things. It's kind of like adrenal fatigue. Does it really exist? Well, I'll tell you what. It exists for me. I find pain in that point. When I get people off this stuff and help them with their psoas and get a little structural reintegration, man, they feel so much better. So I know it works. Yeah. It's called the ileocecal valve. And it's the valve between the intestines, the small and large intestines. So the small intestine has the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, and then the cecum is the first part of the colon. So right at that point, there's a valve, and that valve has neuroendocrine influences. So both hormones and nerves influence that valve. And it's really interesting because when digestive irritation happens, that little valve is super important because it directs how much stuff's moving through and what's being sucked back. And you want everything to move smoothly, So it comes back to the first 2 most important things for my patients: how are your bowel movements and how are you sleeping? If I can get those 2 things happening for people, man, I've done great work with them. They're going to improve. But if I don't get those things together, it's always a struggle. So ileocecal valve syndrome. So the other things that irritate that valve, we got chips, we got popcorn. Popcorn's really interesting. Those little bits, that sharp shard, it looks like like an insect skeleton. That stuff doesn't go very well through that tight little valve. Those are really delicate tissues inside there. Those microvilli at the ends of the simple columnar epithelial cells that stick into the food in our bodies like soil, like roots in a soil. When those things get irritated at that tight junction, you can get a little bit of blood, a little inflammation. That changes the surface. It changes the bugs that live there. You start to get dysbiosis. Things like that happen. So I just pull those foods. Nuts and seeds for the same reason. They're hard to digest, especially nut butter. Nut butter has been taken off the tree, out of the shell, into the nut, shipped across the world, into a machine, heated up, turned into butter, stuck in a thing, and stuck on a shelf. It's not happy. Okay? Remember Grandma had the walnuts in the bag, you get the nutcracker, you crack the walnuts. Okay, so if you're going to do nuts and seeds, and for some people, they really want them, I have them soak them overnight. And do like a few at a time, 8 to 12 of them. But when I really want to rescue somebody when they're really sick, I just say you're going to do this 100%. It's not 95%. It's 100%. Then you only need to do it for 3 weeks, 3 months, maybe 6 months if you're really bad. But once you've done it for that long, once you've got the bike going straight again, man, you can eat pizza. I've seen it over and over again. The bike will keep going. But if you never get the bike out of the mud and wobbling, you're always going to be susceptible to the next insult, okay?
What about chia seeds?
Chia is pretty cool, yeah. And chia is fine, and I find hemp seeds are pretty mellow too. Yep, hemp and chia. Chia is mostly fatty, so it doesn't have that irritating kind of digestive problem. So nuts, seeds, chips, popcorn. And then we had the 3, cocoa also. And this is the big catch for people. Of course, the main adrenal symptom, you find people, I just crave chocolate. That's the classic adrenal thing. Theobromine, right? It's very stimulating to the adrenal system. It does. So here's the thing. People crave raw and not raw. So I'm just saying people crave chocolate when they have adrenal deficiency. So what we do is we go, okay, we'll give you a little bit of chocolate. Or we say, okay, you got to eat just dark chocolate. Okay, just dark chocolate. So you pulled out all the dairy and all those stuff. And people are like, sweet, now I'm good, right? I'm like, no, it's cocoa. It's cocoa. The cacao bean irritates the ileocecal valve. I can't give you data on that. I can give you clinical experience of my teacher who showed me that, who's practiced for 30 years, who I've been using for 10 years, and you got to get the cocoa out, guys. And you got to get that adrenal stimulation out too. The chocolate stimulation. Oh, look at the poopy lip. Oh man, God. The 3 last ones, which I conclude that really aren't foods, but we use them as our main chemicals to adjust our life experience through chemistry, right? Alcohol, caffeine, and that includes theophylline, guys. That includes green tea. Theophylline can even be harder because everybody metabolizes differently. If your COMT pathway isn't working well, if you have homozygous COMT depletion, you will feel terrible on tea, and it will stimulate your adrenals more. It's more stress on the system. So you just got to pull people off of stimulants, and that includes mate.
Even though it supports the kidneys.
Supports the kidneys, man. I mean, that's a serious diuretic. Mate. And some of my best friends own mate eco teas. So I've been like mate. I've been researching mate. I like Suprarenal for so long, and it's a wonderful thing. I love it. But my own experience with it, we were drinking gourds. Like early on when we first came back from Argentina and drinking them up. Man, I started getting I'd pee all the time. I started getting really deficient. And so you just got to temper everything. For most people, it's fine. A little bit of mate is great. And I like to do a little bit more sea salts and a little magnesium, a little extra stuff with it. And I've actually created a drink called Mate Power that has, a lot of taurine, magnesium, sea salt, lime. My wife Cara, who's here, helped design that with me. So anyway, mate is good. But in this case, guys, when you're at the place I'm talking about adrenal rescue, okay? I'm talking about rescue. Someone's down in the hole. We got to get them out. The thing is, when you're giving them the rope, it's not like they're going to hold on with one hand and be like, yeah, I'm pretty good, and then they slide down. The worst thing that happens to me is that we go along a ways and a person's feeling way much better. They're feeling better. Everything's going good. And then they decide that they're going to change I felt like I just wanted to do this a little bit. And then a week later, they're crashing again. The second time going around rescuing them, they're like, oh, God, okay, can I really do this? It's harder. It's just like with cancer. If you do a great cancer protocol, someone gets the cancer suppressed, they get rid of the cancer, whatever, then they're like, I'm done with that. Okay, now I'm good in my life. I'm going to eat, I'm going to go donuts and whatever else. I'm done. Which is the classic thing, right? Just remove the tumor, it's gone. Well, the second time is worse. It sucks. It's harder. So once you kind of get the people on the program of rescuing their adrenals, you get them back online again, then we can work with an 80% type of thing. And it's about each person, and you can recognize, ooh, God, there's that pain again. Oh, my hip started hurting. Well, why did it start hurting? You didn't fall off your bike. It's the same old pattern that you had from before. That was when your blood sugar got all switched because your cortisol levels were screwy, that then you started having this shift in your endocrine system, in the organs, and then that related to the nerves. Then the proprioception was off. Proprioception is the place in space that your muscles are in. So every muscle is full of these incredible fibers, right? You've got actin and myosin. They're linking together, and along them are what are called muscle spindles. The spindles are spindles of nerve that wrap onto the fibers. They're measuring the stretch. When you stretch the muscle, there's an impulse back to the spine. Okay, when the body's clear and just feeling great and everything is organized and you're a pure Taoist monk, everything's perfect. No pain. Just like me. No. Okay, no. But, but when you're really tired, you're really messed up, what happens is one muscle reports something different. It thinks that this is stretched. And it's like, oh my God, I'm stretched. Oh my God, I'm stretched. And the muscle next to it says, well, I'll cover your butt. I'll cover you. And it holds it tighter. So now, over time, you've got a little shift. And remember, most joints aren't like they're locked together like this. They're not. Like the shoulder, it's just a big thing like this. This is like, a wall and a ball. And there's a little lid on it, the acromion. And it's floating around in there. It's not like this. It's floating. And what keeps it in place? Muscles. Muscles are linked. The nerves come from the organs, from the life experience, and link into the muscle fibers. When that isn't working right, when there's a problem in the organs, it manifests through the neurological system. In Chinese medicine, we would call that qi. The qi of the organ relating to the qi of the musculotendinous network. And we have all these, the Chinese mapped out all the networks and everything. It's very cool. So, I think so. We got sugar, wheat, dairy. Remember, dairy has two different parts, right? Lactose, the sugar, and casein, the protein. Proteins and sugars are things that have reactive sites. Nitrogen molecules, things that want to pop. Fats, long chains of hydrocarbons. They're just... Your body chops them up, they're all good. That's why people go, I say no dairy, and they're like, oh God. And I say, well, you can eat butter. They're like, oh, I can eat butter. I'm like, yes, because butter is almost all fats. And if people are really sensitive, you got to go with ghee. And of course, coconut, but some people get sensitive to coconut too. So, but butter is one of my favorite foods. And butyric acid actually is a key ingredient for gut health. Dairy, corn, soy, nuts, seeds, chips, popcorn, cocoa. 10 foods, right? Then there's 3 additionals. We know what those are. Alcohol. Can I just have a glass of wine? Not in the first 3 weeks to 3 months. No. Red, but it's red wine. It has resveratrol. Okay. Caffeine, and then nicotine. Are we good? Basically, when you go to the grocery store, guys, you tell your patients when you go to the grocery store, just skip the middle part. Just don't go in the middle part. Just go on the outside. So when your hunter-gatherers go to their little hunter-gathering bazaar and you go on, it's all the vegetables. Yay, vegetables. And it's all the proteins, the meat proteins or the tempeh, whatever you're going to do. People veggies, I want to talk about vegetarians in this too. But for me, I'm more small amounts of protein, tons of vegetables, excellent fats. That's my diet in general. It's a human diet. It's not paleo. It's just what works.
You're saying this like for the first 3 weeks. Would this be something that you would recommend like for some of us that do have a lot of stress but we're not at the
right.
Maybe like a quarter to do this for 3 weeks?
It's interesting. I haven't done that. And I haven't thought of it because people always come to me, I want to do a cleanse. We do a liver cleanse. I'm like, well, that's cool, but you cleanse your liver and then you go right back to your life and it's the same,
But it is to make that drastic change in 3 weeks. Wouldn't that be a great?
It'd be a great thing. But then you just don't go back to, McDonald's and you go back to 80%.
Yeah.
And then you become your own biofeedback monitor where you sense, and normally people have a neck pain, they have a shoulder pain, a lot of adrenal problems are hip pains. You guys, I haven't found a sciatica that wasn't diet related. Sciatica. Doesn't mean that you can't treat the person with acupuncture, with structural, stuff, adjustments, chiropractic, everything like that. That's all great. That'll all help. But if you want to undo the pattern, and the body is just like anything else, guys, it's patterns. Once you walk down a certain path every day for 10 years, that path has no bushes on it. It's just a deep groove in the earth. So every time you come back to the point where you're going to go from here to there, you walk down that path. It's just like that in your body. It's these metabolic pathways. The body starts running the same way. So how do you undo it? You've got to pull out all the stuff. You've got to stop walking down that path so you don't go down the path anymore. And you go, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to get to the same place, but we're going to take a different road. And you might have to go through some bushes. You might have to cross a creek, whatever you have to do. But you're going to get there. And you need to create a new pattern. And hopefully, it's not even a pattern. You could take any way you want it. So one day you could climb the rock outcropping to get over there. One other day you could take down through the deep valley. Quick.
Without gluten, are you okay with it?
Yep.
Beans and lentils?
Lentils, and I'll tell you, beans and lentils, I really like legumes. You got to cook them right. You got to get the phytic acids out right. You got to, so you soak them overnight with warm water. Seaweed works really well. My wife Cara has been helping me eat right by giving me beans that she cooks so they don't make me have gas. Because if you're getting gas from legumes, you're fermenting them. And fermentation is a bit of an inflammatory thing. It's in your bowel. So just be a little bit careful. You don't want to have fermenting stuff going on. That's not a good sign. The whole idea that like you burp and it means the meal was good. More beer. Yes? Fruit. In that 3-week period, it's berries, melons if they really need something. And then if apricots are in season, I go for those too. But it's basically no fruits. It's no bananas, no mangoes. Remember, it's just 3 weeks, guys. Some people need 3 months. I personally did 6 months. I had excruciating hip pain for 3 years, did everything I could possibly do. I met a guy when I was in school who was an applied kinesiologist. 1 treatment, done. Pain gone. I've been free of pain for 12 years. I was like, what the heck happened? That's how I started this whole process and got deep into applied kinesiology and learned and spent, for a year I did every week. We did a group at the Naturopathic College and I did a 100-hour course. I went through it twice. Spent a lot of time with a teacher who showed me how to work this stuff out. But I'm going to try to get through this stuff for you guys. Because I think we're going to go about 15 minutes late, if that's okay with you guys. So it's 15 minutes left. That's 15, 20, right in there. Okay. So This is my acute rescue program, okay? So adrenal glandular, I put at the top, okay? Adrenal glandular means it's the adrenal gland from a cow, from a bovine source, that's actually been freeze-dried and then powdered and put into a capsule, okay? I only use one company. I'm not big about supporting companies, but it's because I found that they were the only one that could guarantee me their cows were free range. Not standard process, guys. Sorry. Those guys are not, they're USDA at best. So I'm all about respect for animals. I'm about meat that's been treated well. We're all going to die, but I want life to be good. I'm not into supporting suffering. I don't want suffering in the meat that I'm eating. So, I'm not into hardening that market at all. So I use one product, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. I don't want to support that company, but do some research. Teach me. Okay, pure encapsulations. Dang it! Sorry, Larry W. Okay. They're not here, right? So I also have in here adaptogenic adrenal support formula. So I basically use what are considered sort of like kingly herbs, adaptogenic herbs. The reason is because there's a group of herbs, and Donnie's been really a pioneer in this realm to help us understand which herbs have the three N's, right? They're normalizing, they're non-toxic, and they're non-specific. And they really work on that central organizing network, the PHPTA system. They're not just focusing on one gland. We have herbs like that are real specific, If you got a UTI, you're going to use things like pipsissewa. You're going to use a bunch of Chinese herbs. I'm not going to list, but there's ways to treat specific things. But the adaptogens generally work on a more general level to normalize function. I use a number of adaptogens. And of course, if you check out Natura's booth, they have a couple of adaptogenic formulas that are great models for how it works. They're really great, and they do a good job of just everyday maintenance. So I do that with the adrenal glandular. I do the glandular in the beginning, and that's really for me between 2 and 8 weeks. 8 weeks at the far end. I sometimes have to cycle people back on it down the road. Some people are really tough, they're really hard. They've been on hormones for a long time. It's really hard to get systems back into connectivity again. It takes some time. So I'll go back on it, but I never leave somebody on. I've had people come in and be like, yeah, I've been on adrenal for 3 years. I'm like, oh my God. Because, it is adding cortisone, it is adding hormone, adrenaline, epinephrine, everything else to your system. And we know that stuff over time pushes energy away from what? Rebuilding bone, rebuilding nerve, rebuilding vascular tissue. So you don't want to do that, because we know osteoporosis levels go up in people who are on steroids for long term. So I'm not into that idea. So I use it short term. It's like a reinitiation. And I was going to say one thing that's interesting is that when you reinitiate the cycle, you do two things. When you give someone the glandular, they both get a little bit of that cortisol, which, cortisone, they get that effect. So they get that cooling effect. They can turn off some of the cycles, whether it's autoimmunity or it's this fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue thing. They get that sort of cool things down effect, but it also stops the activating signaling. It also lets the hypothalamus and pituitary rest and gives the adrenals some time to rebuild. So as you're eating, as you're getting their diet back together, as you're getting them, they start to be able to store energy in the adrenals, and then the whole adrenal is there to say, we're okay, we don't need to demand anything from you for a while. Remember, guys, the first pitfall you're all going to see in practice when you do this is, I feel great. I just started to go out. I went to the show. I stayed up all night. I've been working 40 hours a week again, and then boom, they're dead again. And so I'll just go ahead and get into real quick an analogy that I think is very helpful, and it's the idea that I think of the adrenal system as like a bank account system where you have a certain amount of savings, and we all are born with a certain savings account. You have a savings account, and you start to spend your money. And when you're a kid, you spend money like man, there's no tomorrow. My savings, I got money. I don't even know how much money I got. I got money. I'll just go ahead and, you do drugs, you drink, you party, whatever you do as a kid. You just go play video games for weeks or whatever it is that these kids are doing today. Listening to the music that's just driving the energy systems, and they do fine with it for a long time. But what happens is, as you deplete the savings gets weaker and weaker. You start to feel like, what's going on here? I don't have the energy I need to spend to do what I want to do. And it could just be working a 40-hour week, having a couple kids, being stressed out, and as you drive the stress every day, you're using a little bit more and a little bit more. You get to the point where your savings account can't meet your needs anymore. You've created a ton of little cycles. You're paying your mortgage, you're paying your student loans, you're paying your kids' tuition, you're buying your food every week. And all the little cycles of constant demand on your financial system are demanding that same thing on your energetic system, on your financial reserve of energy, your kidney reserve. So and you get to the point where you're at the midpoint, basically. Things are getting now you're getting a little, oh God, what's happening? And what happens is, buy on credit. Right? No interest for 6 months, guys. Come on. So So then you're like, okay, what I'm going to do? I'm going to get energy from other tissues. I'm going to start taking energy from other places. I'm going to start pulling energy from other areas to nourish my kidneys, from myself. So now you're into this credit thing. And now you already couldn't meet your cycles. And as you get more credit, you feel a little confident again. You got a little bit behind you. You invest a little deeper. And so now you're invested a little deeper and the cycles want more. And you don't have it. And at one point the credit becomes so demanding, you got to pay the finance charges. You're constantly trying to keep up with it and you can't. So the system really starts to break down in a huge way because you can't meet those demands of the credit that you've already taken out. And it's just like when you basically fault on your mortgage, It's the same thing. It just happens in the body. And then that's when the named disease occurs. That's when you're fibromyalgic. That's when your chronic fatigue comes up. That's where you get the infection. That's where you have, a cancer starts to develop. So we want to get people way before that point. You want to realize that they're on credit already. So what do? I'm going to start paying down their debts. How are we going to do that? We're going to pull out all the insults first. All those foods that are basically costing you. Pull those out. Okay, get rid of the insults. Treat the pathological factors, whether they have heat, whether they've got cold, whether they've got a deficiency in a specific organ. Whatever your system of diagnosis is, treat that. Use adaptogens to help normalize the system. That kind of, again, curbs the debt and kind of solves the finance charge solution. Then I use the adrenal up front to try and give them a little bit of, here's something to go right directly in your bank account. Charge you up a little bit. But don't spend it. Don't spend the money. Seriously, don't spend it until you've got a bunch of savings. The credit has been paid off now. It's just like if you're running a business or something. You can't keep spending. Once you start feeling good, you're starting to pay your credit down. Well, don't start buying a bunch of new stuff. No, you got to pay the credit down to zero again. This is an important metaphor for me. As I realized that metaphor, it helped me a lot to understand because I constantly get to the place where the patient says, "Oh my God, I feel so good. I'm going back to my life." And I'm like, "No, you're not. You're going to feel so good, and you're going to keep telling me you feel so good for another 3 months, and we're going to chill out. And you're going to make a couple of choices along the way that you want to do, a couple of compromises. That's fine. We'll work those out. But you're not going to go back to your life until we're stable, until the bike is on the path and it's got momentum again." Okay? Big problem, though, is that people fall in that pitfall. They start feeling better. You're like, "Oh my God, this person's feeling great. Awesome. Go for it." And collapse. So the nutrient support, I want to talk about a little bit of that. I like to use key nutrients, and oftentimes it's just things that are the key nutrient cofactors for those metabolic processes. You know what I mean by nutrient cofactors? They're little bits of material that facilitate a change from one compound to another. Whether it's one hormone becoming another hormone, or one toxin becoming a conjugated toxin that can then be excreted out of the body. It's some change that needs to occur that we need to support. Okay? Then we have diet. We talked about that. And then I like bone broths. Bone broths are really beautiful, and it's all about good free-range organic bones, doing them in the right way. If you don't know much about bone broth, cooking bone broths, it's an incredible source of great nutrition. It builds the bone marrow. It's another layer of putting money back in the savings account. Okay? And then structural stuff. We've got to get the structural part, got to get the emotional part, all these. So indigenous cultures used to use the glandulars as well. When people were sick, when they were really ataxic and weak, those people would get the adrenal, they'd get the kidney. They used to give different glands for different people based on what they had going on for them. And so when I started studying Chinese medicine, they use a lot of glandulars. If you've got a problem with that organ, eat that organ. It has all the materials of that organ. So I talked about reinitiating the feedback loop, right? The hypothalamus. So you reinitiate the feedback loop, you shut down the activation system, and you get to put money back in the bank account. Vegetarian solutions. For a long time there was a product called Isocort. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but it was by a company called Bezwecken, and it was adrenal cortex extract originally, and then they switched to a fermented plant extract that was either from like yam and or echinacea or something. They were fermenting this plant extract to get a very cortisol-like substance, and they've discontinued the product. So I have no solution right now. So for people who are veggie, you just have to really get the dietary part right. You got to get the herbs in place, and the herbs are the long-term solution. People are going to be on herbs for a couple years, possibly the rest of their lives, depending. How deep are those patterns, and how much support do they need? Some people, no matter what step they take, they're falling down the same ravine. And after a while, they're back down in the pit, they're down in there in the creek bed, and they're stumbling over the brambles, and they just can't get out of there. You want to help them get back up to the ridge again, so we've got to keep finding solutions. And botanicals are a great way to do that. They help keep you up on the ridge and keep you going in a clear place for the long term, because patterns are hard to break. So 2 things I do with vegetarians too. Apple cider vinegar, really good one. This is like basic treatment principles for naturopaths. Apple cider vinegar. And what I do is I have people take a tablespoon before each meal. You can do it straight, just wash it out with a little water so you don't have, it sitting in your teeth for a long time, but it's right before you eat. It triggers the parietal cells to make hydrochloric acid. It's beautiful. It really works well. It prevents osteoporosis. It helps balance pH in the body, keeps infections down. It's good for bone spurs. It's good for atherosclerosis. And it makes your digestion get going. It kicks it up. Because one of the places that essence deficiency manifests is that you don't make what we call stomach fire in Chinese medicine, which we could call in biomedical medicine hydrochloric acid. It's fire. It's burning up everything to transform it. Okay? And then if people don't like the apple cider vinegar, or they can't do it, or they're sensitive to the vinegar or something, I use betaine hydrochloride. Okay? And betaine is trimethylglycine. It comes from beets. And it works with hydrochloric acid to keep it stable until it hits your gut. Once it interacts with other acids, it breaks apart, and then you get free hydrochloric acid in the stomach. And the way you dose it is you give the person 1 before a meal. If they do good with that, great. The next meal they do 2. If they do great with that, the next meal they do 3. And you go to the level where and this is about 10 minutes before they eat, you have them take this betaine hydrochloride. And then once they get a burning sensation in the stomach, you back down to the previous level from the meal before, and you hold that for each meal onward for a time. You don't want to keep on it forever. I don't want people to be on digestive enzymes forever. We have a pancreas. We have a duodenum. We have a spleen. We want to make those things work right. If people don't have those organs, sure. If you don't have a gland, we need to give you that substance. But most people do have the gland, and we can make it work better. So it's part of that short-term build-up process, but you can do it for a while. Yes? Bitters is good too. Yeah, you can use bitters too. But again, bitter has a very cooling effect on the body. It has bitter cools the fire. It clears heat. So for some people, it's better than others. It depends on their constitution. If they're menopausal, they got a lot of heat. Yeah, it's good. Someone who's really cold though and stuff, maybe not as good. I just got to give you guys a list of good veggie foods for the kidney adrenal system. And I'm just going to leave that for you. You can take a look at it. You have it, right? Is it right there? Good. So the difference from the long term is basically you keep the herbs going, you have the person on a constitutional formula, you shrink down the nutritional protocol, you move them from 100% dietary intervention to an 80% dietary intervention. Then you make sure their structure stays reintegrated, break up the patterns that are showing up in the neuromuscular system, because those will feed back into the organs too. The memory of the patterns is in the soma and in the viscera, and they're back and forth. And then the emotional repatterning. Make sure people deal with the emotional issues around what's going on for them. It's a big deal. And once you're kind of out of the woods and they're not in that deep ravine, it's easier to work on the emotions. So a lot of times I kind of help people get through the really intense place, and then we work on the emotions more deeply. Sea salt is another one I want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about it on Sunday a lot more. Sea salt's really important. Sea salt helps you hold water. Everybody wants to drink a ton of water, but remember, water is a solvent. It dissolves the mountain. It makes riverbeds. It's very potent stuff, and it's conductive, but we need sea salt to anchor our fluids in our body to keep our tissues moist. So remember sea salt. And I always have sea salt with these. And sea salt, not the sodium chloride on the table, not the iodized sea salt, the iodized salt on the table at home or at the restaurant. Use the sea salt for it's got all the minerals in it, and that guides things to the kidneys. So oftentimes people, if they're real deficient, their kidneys are really weak, I give them like a quarter teaspoon of sea salt with their formula. I'll have them take it with their tincture or with their granules and mix it in twice a day and drink that. So then that salt anchors the formula to go to the kidneys. It's a really beautiful way of old Chinese medicine approach. Remember, bone broth, so many good things. Free-range wild local meats, I've got a list there for you guys. Turkey is actually a great source of protein, and you can get good sustainable turkey a lot of places. Fish is great. One thing I'll say about toxic burden, and what Walter Kinney was talking about yesterday, in order to eliminate toxic burdens that are really hard for us to take, heavy metals, arsenic, all the things that we're seeing in our food supply, just vary your sources. People go, what can I eat? Well, you just eat something different all the time. Don't eat from the same stream. Don't keep getting the same Alaskan salmon. Because it's over time that the buildup happens, that the mercury deposits grow and grow and grow until they become damaging. So change it. Get your pork from one place if you're going to eat pork. If you're going to eat fish, get it from here. Even your dairy sources. Just be a little bit careful and know where they come from. That's the best way to avoid those problems. So I put some key nutrients here. You've got to get vitamin D levels right? You guys cannot... Vitamin D, and I'm going to talk a lot about that tomorrow. Vitamin D has to be done, and there's a great spot test you can get too from Doctor's Data, $45. You just Patient takes it home, blood prick, put it on the slide, send it in. They give you a great, and it's very accurate, works great. I'll talk about D tomorrow. Zinc is a cofactor that's used in tons of reactions along with magnesium. So facilitating those interchanges, zinc and magnesium. B vitamins, very important. Not everybody though. Some people get too much stimulation, especially when they're real sensitive, from B vitamins. Sometimes you got to dose them in the morning. Sometimes you have to isolate certain ones out. But I like to use a good whole foods or a really good methylated. That's a reduced B complex.
Have you seen innates?
Yes. Yes. I have some innate. Yep, exactly. Yep, it's good. It's just that some people need more too. I sometimes put the whole food with a little extra. Phosphatidylserine, I use that with the whole adrenal. Okay. Sometimes people who take the adrenal, and I dose the adrenal, and I have a protocol that's coming up here. I'm just not going to get to everything. But in this sample adrenal protocol, you'll see that I have under additional supplements. This is a couple slides ahead. It's slide 34. You'll see that this is how I write up a protocol for a patient, and you're more than welcome to use this template. But it gives them a clear idea of what's happening at each point in the day. And you can see there I've got the adrenal, right? So it says take on waking and at midday. That 3-cap 2 times a day is a good starting dose for most people. Take it on waking and at midday. Why is that? That's because cortisol levels are highest in the morning, and then they're still pretty good, stable in the midday. At night, cortisol levels should drop off, and some people have too much cortisol at night. And it's oftentimes you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning. We call it liver qi stagnation in Chinese medicine. We call it cortisol excess, or cortisol imbalance in more modern terms. Either way, if you use phosphatidylserine, and I was using in these are the actual products that I used for this patient. Serifos is phosphorylated serine, which is an amino acid bound to a lipid, a phospholipid. Now what's cool is that that's a big component of our cell membranes. And what that does, the serine soaks up excess cortisol. Are we done? Soaks up excess cortisol at night. I'll just finish this part. So as you're giving them the adrenal in the morning, then you're giving them the Serifos at night. It's 1 to 3 capsules. I normally start with 2 or 3. It gets people to stay sleeping, so that if in case they get too much stimulation, it kind of helps reset the rhythm. Cortisol high in the morning, cortisol low at night. Sometimes I add a little melatonin at night if people need it. Sometimes it helps. So it's sort of like re-regulating the pattern of the cycle of waking and sleeping. And that's all I've got. You guys have details here, and I'll try to hit some more tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be fun. Autoimmunity. Thank you all so much for coming. Pleasure.